The Mount Panorama circuit is located in Bathurst, Australia. It's most well known for the Bathurst 1000 supercar touring car event in October, as well as the Bathurst 12-hour sports car race each February. The track consists of two extremely long, relatively flat straights, along with a tight, twisting wall-lined section up and down the mountain. It's also technically a collection of public roads, with houses, a vineyard, and other features found around the track. The track has appeared in at least 31 PC games since 1997, as of early 2025. In this video, we'll complete a lap of the circuit, switching between games as they were chronologically released. After that, we'll take a look at 4 locations around the track to see how each game compares to real life. Then we'll finish by putting related games head to head. There are, however, 4 games that won't be included in the main comparison, so I'll list those first. Barrow GT was released in 2022 and used a low polygon off-the-shelf track asset from retro cartoon cars, which would be a bit out of place among other games of that era. You can also take every corner without braking. Likewise, its sister title, Barrow F22, which replaces the GT cars with F1 style vehicles, also won't be included. This again released in 2022. Heads Go Racing is another title that uses the low detail Unity track. Although it features better textures, it's still a relatively arcade affair. And finally, I can't include World of Speed from 2017, an online-only arcade reworking of Project Cars 2, as it's no longer playable. As you can see here, it was set to include Bathurst. So that leaves 27 games to look at, which we'll do now. In A Lap in Time, Bathurst, Mount Panorama. We start with Touring Car Champions from 1997. Now this game used full motion video for the track, so it's clearly the most realistic version of the circuit, but the game itself's not great, with the car wobbling about all over the place. Dick Johnson's V8 Challenge was an early 3D game with a fairly rudimentary version of the circuit, whilst V8 Challenge came out in 2002 and has full widescreen, but the colours feel a little bit off here. TOCA Race Driver has massive trees and a really badly modelled version of the track, which is why TOCA Race Driver 2 redid the track and made it a lot more realistic. And then along came TOCA Race Driver 3, which pushed it into widescreen and made everything even better. It's a shame then that Race Driver Grid takes everything back a notch and makes it a bit brown and unpleasant to look at. This is Driving Speed 2, a free game with a bespoke version of the circuit, which is pretty good actually. And here is Shift 2 Unleashed with its very wide version of the track and lots of special effects. Race Room Racing Experience added the track in 2013, but the textures here are a bit newer. Speaking of textures, iRacing really should retexture their game because it looks really old-fashioned here compared to things like Grid 2, which makes things feel a lot better than the original Grid game, and its sequel, Grid Autosport, which made things a little bit more simulation. Next up is Motorsport Revolution, a horrible Unity-based game with a not very good version of the track, and here's Project Cars, whose track is not too bad. It's very similar though to the one in R Factor 2, or R Factor 2 is more like Project Cars, we'll see in a minute on the comparisons. GI Racing 2.0 is to advertise Game Institute's programming course, whilst Drift Gear Racing 3 is a horrible drift game using the same off-the-shelf Unity asset. CarX Drift Racing calls the track Milton Drive, but it's clear that it's actually Bathurst. And here's Project Cars 2 with its somewhat flickery track surface. Next up is Forza Motorsport 7, with it's quite dark in the day due to the positioning of the sun, and Assetto Corsa Competizione, which is good, but the clouds in the background do look a little bit weird here. Automobilista 2 has a fantastic version of the track, extremely realistic as we'll see in a minute, and Project Cars 3 has trees in the background that don't really light very well in this game. Grid Legends adds a lot of pyrotechnics, and it's a very nice feeling game overall, whilst Forza Motorsport isn't showing the highest quality textures here on my machine, but it's a good version of the track. And Assetto Corsa Evo is the most recent version of the circuit and possibly the best yet, and that completes a lap and a bit of the track. Let's now check out 4 locations around the track compared to real life. These are not ordered chronologically, as I'll collect together games in a series, so you can see how they evolved through each iteration. Here's a shot from real life in 2022 on the Mountain Straight. These real life shots were taken late in the day and not during a race, so some of the barriers are missing. Touring Car Champions shows how the track looked in 1997, although it looks like it's slightly stretched vertically. Dick Johnson V8 Challenge is the first 3D model version of the game, so it's pretty basic scenery-wise. V8 Challenge has the trees pretty inaccurate, and the feel is more European than Australian. Given the developers were Swedish, this might be why. Driving Speed 2 was another game with its own unique version of the track, but it has too many trees, like V8 Challenge. Motorsport Revolution is the first of several games to use the same off-the-shelf Unity asset. This game is pretty gloomy looking, and the tree leaves look weirdly artistic. GI Racing 2.0 uses the same asset, but the texturing is better. It does feel a bit green though, like you're racing in the Matrix. There's no bumper cam in this game. Drift Gear Racing 3 uses the same asset again, but it looks more like Motorsport Revolution. Note the barrels to drift around, they kinda get in the way. There's no bumper cam in this game either. CarX Drift Racing Online calls the track Milton Drive, but it's clear what it is. They've tweaked and removed a lot of scenery items, but there are still cues that this is based on the same core Unity asset, as you'll see later on. TOCA Race Driver's version is awful, with massive trees everywhere, and the banner over the road far away in the dip. TOCA Race Driver 2 improved things immensely in every way. It's missing some details though. TOCA Race Driver 3 has the colours and feeling much more accurate to real life, though there are too many conifer trees here. Race Driver Grid has the unpleasant brown filter that makes everything feel sepia and old-fashioned. The track is arguably less accurate than TOCA Race Driver 3. Grid 2 is much more accurate, but the hill on the right isn't quite right. Grid Autosport uses the same track as Grid 2, with different lighting. Grid Legends adds cool pyrotechnics and a mildly revamped version of the track. Shift 2 Unleashed has the banner and bushes on the right a bit further down the track from the driveway entrance on the left. Project Cars is pretty accurate, with the white picket fence on the right, tall tree and power lines, though the pole isn't quite as per real life. Project Cars 2 has changed some tree textures and added a vignette effect to the top of the screen. Project Cars 3 has added a new awning on the left and made the lighting on the trees worse. Race Room Racing Experience is pretty good, though the power line on the right is incorrect. iRacing is very accurate, as you'd expect, with near perfect trees, bushes, and even the closed sign on the vineyard on the left. R-Factor 2 has a rather bright look and has the same incorrect power line as the Project Cars games. Automobilista 2 is very accurate, with a good representation of all the trees, power pole, bushes, and the fence. Forza Motorsport 7 is pretty accurate too, with trees, power line and bushes decently represented. Forza Motorsport is very good. It even has the race platforms on the left, the only game to have them. It's added some spotlights for nighttime racing too. Assetto Corsa Competizione has the closed sign on the left, and generally extremely accurate scenery items, especially the right-hand side of the track. And Assetto Corsa Evo uses largely the same model of the track, but with better lighting. Here we are climbing up the hill towards the cutting at the top. I picked this so we can compare the hillside on the left in particular, as well as the trees on the right. There's a lot of difference between the games here. Touring Car Champions shows how green the track was back then. Dick Johnson V8 Challenge is pretty basic. V8 Challenge has too many massive trees and a grey look. Driving Speed 2 is warm and colourful, not too bad. Motorsport Revolution is the first of several assets using the same Unity track. This one is gloomy and basic, with a very wrong hillside on the left. GI Racing 2.0 has filled out the scene with many more trees, which isn't particularly realistic. Nice lighting though. Drift Gear Racing 3 has less good lighting and some pretty awful scenery. CarX Drift Racing Online has removed a lot of the scenery items, but the track leading up the hill on the left is the same as the last few games, hence me believing it's made from the same core track asset. TOCA Race Driver is laughably inaccurate here. Much of the track feels like a roller coaster with banked turns. TOCA Race Driver 2 is more accurate, if a little bit empty. TOCA Race Driver 3 is even more accurate, though the trees on the right aren't great and are repetitive. Race Driver Grid isn't very good. The big tree on the right is very inaccurate. Grid 2 uses the same asset with better lighting, still not great. Grid Autosport is once again using the same asset, with tweaked lighting again. Grid Legends has remodelled the track, but it's still not quite right on the left. The power lines are good though. Shift 2 Unleashed is rather basic looking and not quite right. The power lines aren't right either. Project Cars is pretty accurate, give or take the trees on the right. The power lines aren't right. Project Cars 2 refines the trees, but they're still not correct. Project Cars 3 just tweaks the lighting and adds a balloon. Race Room Racing Experience is fairly good, but the power lines are too thick. The big tree is also missing here. iRacing is good with correct power lines, fencing and pretty good tree placement. R Factor 2 is similar to iRacing, but also has the same power lines as Project Cars. I'm seeing a lot of similarities with the Project Cars games in R Factor 2. Automobilista 2 is extremely accurate with power lines, trees and fencing. The trees are a bit big though, overall. Forza Motorsport 7 feels more like Shift 2 Unleashed, with very full looking trees. Power lines are good here though. Forza Motorsport is very good, very close to reality. Assetto Corsa Competizione is good too, maybe the trees could be a bit better. Assetto Corsa Evo is a bit better again. Moving on to Brock's Skyline and the drop off the mountain, let's compare to see which games render the view well and which don't bother. Touring Car Champions is obviously real, but it's interesting to notice the yellow and black barriers on the left. This track was recorded on a regular day, so has several barriers that aren't there when racing happens. The camera settings here make the distance feel much closer than it is in real life. Dick Johnson V8 Challenge is very simple with a very basic background. V8 Challenge is pretty good here, using a large photograph for the backdrop. This is the older version of the track with a gravel trap on the left. Driving Speed 2 is okay, but not great, with the corner shape being rather incorrect. Motorsport Revolution has a weird photograph of somewhere in Europe as the background. As you head along Conrod Straight, you can see a massive BMW on the horizon. GI Racing 2.0 fills the corner with trees, so no need to render the background. Drift Gear Racing 3 has a good go at the background, but the overly bright track assets feel misplaced against the dark background. CarX Drift Racing Online changes a lot of the track scenery, so it's not really like real life here. TOCA Race Driver has the ridiculously massive trees here, and a terrible representation of this section of the track, with huge drops and banked corners, not at all like real life. TOCA Race Driver 2 is a lot better. The background looks particularly pretty, I think. TOCA Race Driver 3 is maybe more realistic, but looks rather dull. The duplicate trees strike again here. Race Driver Grid has extra tyre stacks to stop corner cutting, and the background is so faded back it's hard to make out. Grid 2 upgrades the track with tarmac runoff and more visible background, but is otherwise largely the same. Grid Autosport uses largely the same asset, though I captured it a bit more to the right here. The background has become less easy to see again though. Grid Legends is a nice upgrade here. Apart from the massive power lines, it's very accurate. Nice background too, with 3D objects used for distant trees and buildings. Shift 2 Unleashed feels a bit odd, as there's no hill or trees on the right. The background is good though. Project Cars feels pretty dull here, which is unusual for the game, which is largely very pretty. Project Cars 2 is better, though the background feels more like Arizona than Australia. Project Cars 3 balances the lighting better here, so feels a bit more realistic. Race Room Racing Experience isn't really great, the heavy power lines strike again, and the background doesn't feel that far away. iRacing is extremely accurate, only the neon green distant hills bring this one down a notch. R Factor 2 looks very much like Project Cars again, despite being released by Image Space Inc. at the time. Did the Project Cars series use the same asset, perhaps? Automobilista 2 is very good, with a pretty accurate backdrop too. Note that the grills on the road on the left are all present and correct here. Forza Motorsport 7 is okay, the foreground is too dark and the background view is too hazy though, and those anti-corner cut tyre stacks aren't realistic or safe. Forza Motorsport is another good version here, with everything pretty accurately represented. Assetto Corsa Competizione is okay, but the background is a bit weird, with haze not affecting the very distance. Trees are great in the foreground though. Assetto Corsa Evo is based on the same asset. I run the curbs here though, so the angle is off. The background fog is pretty dense though, you can't really see the view. The final stop is on the run up to the iconic bridge at the end of the lap. The large hotel on the right opened in 2009, so many of the earlier games lack this. Touring Car Champions shows the track long before the hotel was added. Note how the video appears to be stretched vertically a bit, as the shape of the bridge is taller than real life. Dick Johnson V8 Challenge is pretty basic here, but a fair representation of how this section looked back then. though it lacks the hillside on the right. V8 Challenge is okay here, with the hill on the right having plenty of fans watching. Driving Speed 2 feels pretty similar, despite being released in 2011, by which time the hotel was long present. Motorsport Revolution has the hotel, but it doesn't look right at all. It also has the older gravel trap on the left, which wasn't present in 2015. The background again feels like Europe, not Australia. GI Racing 2.0 uses the same track model, but adds extra grass and the hotel looks better. The background is too tall though. Drift Gear Racing 3 uses the same hotel as Motorsport Revolution, but is lit better than GI Racing 2.0. CarX Drift Racing Online has a different hotel and feels a bit better, but the wall on the left isn't correct at all. TOCA Race Driver is based on the pre-hotel configuration. The track shape ahead isn't accurate. TOCA Race Driver 2 feels much better than the previous game, especially the lighting, but the track shape is still wrong. TOCA Race Driver 3 fixes the incorrect track shape and feels a lot more Australian in the lighting and colours used. Race Driver Grid has a weird white bridge. I don't feel this is a good upgrade from TOCA Race Driver 3. Despite being modelled in 2010, the track is missing the hotel. Grid 2 drops in the hotel and some sponsorship on the bridge, but everything else is largely identical. Grid Autosport makes the lighting more vibrant, but is pretty much the same as Grid 2. Grid Legends improves everything and adds the wall on the left. Shift 2 Unleashed has a pretty unrealistic hotel with windows that are more like mirrors. The bridge is bland here, but at least the circular lights on the right are present. Project Cars remodels everything and is pretty close to real life. Note the staircase on the right, as it will come up in the next few screenshots. Project Cars 2 feels somehow less realistic, with fairly flat lighting and the vignette effect darkening the top of the picture. Project Cars 3 improves the lighting a lot. None of the Project Cars games have the catch fencing on the left though. Race Room Racing Experience does have the catch fencing and looks pretty accurate, though it's missing the staircase on the right. iRacing's lighting feels a bit basic here. The track is pretty muddy too. R-Factor 2 has pretty flat lighting. The hotel and bridge almost look cartoon-like. Once again, this feels like the same model as the Project Cars games. Interesting. Automobilista 2 is epic. We've got catch fencing, a good hotel, circular lights on the right, and even the signboard by the staircase. It's the only game to have this small detail. Forza Motorsport 7's lighting makes this section of the track very dark, as the sun is behind the hotel. Otherwise it's okay, with the circular lights and other elements outside the hotel, though the staircase is a bit too far down the track. Forza Motorsport makes it all better. Lights, staircase, etc. The only issue here is my old PC and non-SSD hard drive not loading the highest quality textures in time. Assetto Corsa Competizione has another great version of the track, with all the key elements perfectly realised. Assetto Corsa Evo is better again, with refined, more realistic lighting. Let's now compare related games head to head, so you can play Spot the Difference. Here are 4 games with their own unique version of the track. These 4 games are based around the same Unity track model. Here are all 3 of the TOCA Race Driver games. Here are the 4 grid titles. These 4 were all made by Slightly Mad Studios. Here are 4 of the best simulators out there currently. Here are the 2 Forza Motorsport and Assetto Corsa games with the track officially included. Finally, let's go mad. Here are all 27 games at the same time. So, which is your favourite game? Got any memories of racing Bathurst? Leave a comment, like and subscribe, and let me know what tracks I should look at in future. And join me again for a lap in time.